we've worked so hard for so long, it feels like in like the last 2.5 years to like be in the space and be a leader and like help people. And then realize that it's like that's been like a 2 year, 2.5 sprint for me personally. And then to realize like it's more of a marathon, not a sprint. Like if
Yeah.
I stop now, we haven't even started yet.
Welcome to the Tourism AI podcast, where Josh Houston and I talk about all the things at the intersection of artificial intelligence and tourism. And today we are actually doing a bit of a year in review episode. And really, we're just going to be talking about our observations of the last year, some learnings. We're actually starting this podcast like 22 minutes later than our usual start time because we've been talking about all of these things prior to hitting record. Because, yeah, we've just been through a lot of really fascinating sessions lately and learned a lot of different things about just kind of where people are at in this whole AI journey. And I think for me, when I think about the year in review, it's really that, right? And so, it's really, for Tourism AI Network, it's been the full first year as an organization where we've been kind of rolling out services and sort of spending time with people and doing workshops and, really learning about people's jobs and people's in businesses and in tourism and even otherwise outside of tourism, and really learning where people are at. And so let's dive into it. What I think we can do, Josh, is kind of go back and forth. You do one, I do one, and we'll
Yeah.
see how far we get into our list here. So why don't you start? What would you say is was your biggest aha moment of the year from a kind of a learning perspective?
Yeah, okay, so my biggest aha, the thing that like was the most profound to realize was that I believe, in my opinion, that we are 2/3 of the way through the first like category of AI adoption in terms of people, right? I think we've had 2 years of first mover phase, and it very much still feels like it. We thought we were past that like last year when we were at this time like thinking about what's 2024. We imagined like agents and automation and streamline this and yada yada this, all this progress. And we've seen so much progress in the tech this year. Like everybody has taken like marked leaps forward. However, on the people side, which we always talk about as the hardest part, is the most like important part. We're not even to the early adopter phase. And I just realized that like maybe a month and a half ago, it like hit me where I was like, we still keep having these problems where people will be like completely dismiss it. Like we'll do trainings and we'll go through this whole process. We'll have a few people who are like, I'm saving 2 hours a day. I'm getting all this value. I'm having such a good time. I'm like, that's amazing. And then we like turn to the next person and they're like, I don't even remember where to search how to log in. And we've seen that pattern. Like there's always a couple people who are happy to jump in and be the first mover in their space or in their team. And then there are people who are like, I'm not convinced that this is gonna help, so I'm just not wasting time on it yet because I'm busy.
Mhm.
And that was like a huge unlock mentally to realize because on it was encouraging and discouraging in some ways. In one way, it's like we've worked so hard for so long, it feels like in like the last 2.5 years to like be in the space and be a leader and like help people. And then realize that it's like that's been like a 2 year, 2.5 sprint for me personally. And then to realize like it's more of a marathon, not a sprint. Like if
Yeah.
I stop now, we haven't even started yet. That was
Yeah.
that was what I like kind of realized after I realized, okay, this is just the first mover phase. Now we're moving to the early adopter phase, which might last for the next 2, 3 years as well. Like people are slow to adopt new ways of doing things. So it's like that's gonna take forever. Take like it might be a 10-year journey to like my mom is like, hey, I'm using ChatGPT all the time. Or whatever it is, like AI is helping me do all of this. Like it might be 10 years for most people till we're there. It might be five, it might be two, I might be completely wrong. But yeah, we're still so early. That was the like the big aha. Peter, what about you? What has been your like the biggest thing you've thought of or learned or had an aha moment around?
Yeah, I would say it's kind of the same thing. I was going to say it in those same kind of words, is that we're still so early in this, but what I'll rephrase it and say the gap is extremely huge between those really the first movers and the sort of early adopters and those folks, and then people who, are not even close to there, right? And so there's, I think my realization has been, there's a lot of people who work in the knowledge work space like us, and I think we make assumptions about uh, how they spend their time. And there's a huge number of people who, and I would say sometimes it's age related and generational, but not always, who just don't spend a lot of time on a computer and who don't spend a lot of time with technology and who, this is such a huge mental hurdle for them to get over to even start understanding how this could possibly fit into their lives. And so there's just this massive gap. I think, we spend so much time, we were talking about, Gemini 2 right before we hit record, and the new demo they just put out yesterday and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, we're at the very forefront paying attention to what's going on all the time. And, the vast majority of people are really busy just doing their job, and their job often is building relationships and being face to face with people, and like spending, maybe 5% of their time at a computer. And so it's like, it's like there's
Yeah.
such a huge gap between those two concepts. It's actually mind-boggling to me. And I think we make assumptions sometimes about just like, oh yeah, here we go, here's this tool, go, right? And it's like, and I think it's not only a gap in terms of technology use, but it's also a mental gap in terms of, I don't even think there's a lot of people here that aren't even convinced about this technology and its power and what it can do, and
Mhm.
sort of are very distrusting about technology. Like I think that's the other thing. There's a lot of distrust about technology, and so
Yeah.
there's this dystopian view about the future. And so there's just a lot, like there's a big hurdle to overcome before we really get any kind of widespread adoption of this technology. So that's been my biggest observation. Though at the same time, I will say that this year I've really observed a widespread adoption of this technology, but at an extremely basic level, right? And
Yeah.
so it's like, when I speak at conferences, I've been, I always ask who uses generative AI tools, and I go through a series of questions. I've talked about it on this podcast before. And, certainly the percentage of people who say they use free generative AI tools has increased dramatically. Like
Mhm.
now it's at 85% of people raise their hand that go to conferences, but their use is extremely simple and basic. And it's, it's maybe I've used it once or twice, or it's, what I mean? And that's people that go to conferences. And so I
Yeah.
think the other thing is like people that go to conferences are probably people that like to learn, people that are at the forefront of their industry, or right. And so it's like that's even a subgroup of the rest of humanity, right? Or the
Right.
rest of the working world, right? So yeah, it's just like so fascinating how big the gap is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's funny because it's so cliche. Like that term has been thrown around for multiple years now, and with other technologies, like always. Like it's just so true. Like it's so true. Like the quote that I think we saw like two full 2.5 years ago was like someone you're not gonna lose your job to AI, you're gonna lose your job to someone using it. And it's like for the most part that actually hasn't happened yet. Like companies
Yeah.
aren't they don't know how to hire for AI skills. They don't know how like to define what is AI adoption and AI intuition? What are the quantitative and qualitative measures? And I'll say as a secondary learning, like the second top thing that I've learned this year is like by and large, we haven't gotten there yet as consultants, as like teachers, educators, as
Mhm.
trainers, as coaches. Like there is nobody I can look at yet that has like nailed down the like what is adoption? What is successful adoption in like normal people? I say normal people is like the opposite of like tech people. So not like I don't mean that in a demeaning way. I mean like tech people are the ones who have like jumped in cannonball or happy to do it haphazardly or ambiguously not knowing what the result's going to be. Normal people are calculated and like, hey, yeah, show me what works and then I'll make a logical choice. Like they don't need like the blind optimism. That doesn't help and serve them. And I think that's fair. It's fair. Like that's the majority of people. But like we've just been in this practitioner mode of like, well, I know what worked for me. So like if you go down the same path here,
Right.
it's gonna like smooth out. But like the pitfall, like the biggest learning inside of that, like the pitfall there for me was like the way I learned was building like tools. Like I built micro SaaS for the last 2 years to learn and teach myself how to be a prompt engineer, how to like build something of value, how to streamline workflows, create efficiencies. Like, and so like my approach for about half the year this year was like, well, that's what everybody's journey should include. Like learn the basics of how to use ChatGPT, then skip past that and start building Zapier, start building Make.com, start using
Yeah.
Airtable, like start building apps, tools. And I was just wrong, straight up dead wrong. And I think like a lot of my like AI colleagues, like my hot take is like we were all wrong together on that premise. And like
Mm,
the message going into 2025, like we're changing how we speak about and how we train and what we have as the target for folks because, and it seems obvious probably when I say like, not everybody needs to be a techie. Like not
yeah.
everybody should build AI. I've been saying that since I started doing it. It's like not everybody should build, but like actions and words. Like we're now just focused on training people how to start going from 0 to 1 so that they can have their aha moment and see like, oh, like yesterday, great session we had with somebody teaching them how to merge 2 documents, 3 documents into a new document. They're like, I want to create a report with these. Like I have an example of the last years and I have like data for this year. And I want to, can I, they were like, can I do something? I've heard AI can help. Can I do something with that? And we're like, yeah, it's a great use case. And so then we just like focused on that and it was like that was a new thing for him to hear like you can multiply 2 files and get a third
Yeah.
like and
Yeah.
that's like I think that's way more interesting and it's fascinating as an HR guy with like a people background. That part of it, the change management, is like what we thought was like change management around a specific tool or solution that we were building and installing to get to production for somebody and then just helping them like, hey, use the tool, that's your change management. But rather it's like understanding why they don't want to use their computer for password management already. Because that's like that tells us a lot about how they're going to interact and relate to the computer that is driving, or showing them the AI. Like, so, anyways, I think that, yeah, the second thing is like that I learned was that it's like going to technical, like on a technical path for driving solutions to companies is like from a tech perspective in Silicon Valley, like they agree, like they're investing in tech startups are like rampantly using AI for everything, and that's great. But like everybody else, it needs to just focus on becoming a like learn how to use the tool. If the tool is a hammer, did you know there's 17 ways to use a hammer?
Right.
And you don't need the shiniest, most expensive hammer. You could just, if you're hanging up like frames on the wall, you don't need to know like how to use a framing hammer. You could just get the smallest like little guy and just put that like one nail in and you don't have to worry about a stud. It's like there's all these analogies that we start to like fall into that are like yeah, like if you know how to use that hammer, you can accomplish the thing that you're looking to accomplish.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'll also say that one of my learnings has been there are, kind of just continuing on this theme of the gaps is that there's significant generational differences. There's also significant differences between sort of urban and rural. And sometimes those differences are real and they exist, and sometimes they aren't. So it's like you can't just assume because somebody's older, they're not going to be sort of like at the forefront of this. But we see that sometimes just
Hmm.
because they're rural doesn't mean like there are rural people who are like way up front and totally like all in, but then there are others who are completely not, right? And so it's like there are these, you can't sort of blanket, I guess, but there are some trends, I guess, if you will,
Yeah.
in terms of like where those differences are. And what's interesting about the generational difference situation is that like, and this is kind of, I guess, observation in number 2 or 3, I'm not really sure, but employees are ahead of their employers
Yeah.
and they really want their employers to step up and help. Yet it's the employers, those people in that generation who are kind of struggling the most that are the ones that need to lead this. And so
Yeah.
there's this interesting dichotomy, or this, I don't know if the dichotomy is the right word, but this interesting situation happening where the very people who need to kind of get in front of this and lead this are the people who probably are the most intimidated and really don't really struggle and really kind of don't know how to kind of go about it. And, to your point, are lacking some even basic computer, I don't even want to call it skills, computer confidence. Right. And so it's like there's this really interesting kind of gap there as well. And I, to your point, our job as consultants is to really figure out how to help bridge that gap in a really meaningful way. And so, I guess I'll sort of say another observation, I guess, if I'm on
Yeah.
the same train, because they all kind of mesh together, is that like consulting in this space is hard, really hard, because it's not only the tech is changing constantly. So like, like I do presentations and I'm like, oh, this is an outdated presentation. I gotta, like, you know what I mean? It's like constant
Yeah.
changes
Yeah.
to everything I say is constantly out of date. So it's super hard.
Right.
But then also then, you run into these situations where it's like, oh, like we're really kind of not even talking. Like, you and I have talked about this a lot of times, Josh, but like we do these enablement sessions and half the time the things that come out of those sessions have nothing to do with artificial intelligence. They're
Yeah.
basic IT, basic computer best practices,
Yep.
right? Password managers,
Totally.
meeting links, like things that you and I take so for granted.
Mhm.
And so it's like it's really, really hard to consult in this space, I'm finding, because
Mhm.
like it's like, even yesterday, I'm going to share this story, but we're going through the AI adoption framework process with CIPR Communications right now. So we've just,
Mhm.
we've been through a process. We started with our own project charter a year ago, and then we have a bunch of new staff. So I'm like, okay, let's kind of go through this let's start from the beginning and sort of
Yeah.
redo, right? And so yesterday I went through our leadership survey and I was like, I got to redo this whole leadership survey because like it fits in certain circumstances, doesn't fit in others. I got to rethink this whole thing. So it's like, to me, it just feels like I'm constantly rethinking how we're approaching things, the services we're going to be providing, how to
Mhm.
price things, it's like it's a constant iteration. And as much as I feel like we've gotten some traction in the last half of this year in terms of, okay, I decided to put a freeze on things and say, okay, we're just going forward with this because we got to go
Mhm.
forward with something. And
Yep.
it's been very successful and people have tremendous feedback. It's been awesome. But I'm like never satisfied that it's like good enough. And like now I'm like, okay, I guess I'm spending my entire Christmas like rethinking this entire survey approach and you know
Mhm.
what I mean? And so it's just like a constantly evolving, reiterating iteration process. And it's like
Right.
extremely hard from a consulting perspective.
It definitely is. It's like because all the traditional methods that consultants have like deployed, like they start to break down when knowing the right path is not the most valuable thing anymore. Like there's been all these shifts and like what is the role of like the coach, the consultant, the third party? Like I will stand by like I still believe the top value that we bring to the table is the perspective of being not in your organization. Like, and AI can't take that away, except that it also is not in your organization. So it's like there's this like you looking yourself in the mirror as a consultant. Like when I used to work in an agency, like we had a competitive advantage against our customers about knowing marginally more than them about brand and marketing and social media because we were hiring like new like it just I don't know like maybe taking a shit on them but like we were hiring new grads who didn't know anything out of college and like
Right.
helping them like learn our ways and they were like 2 months ahead of our client in terms of like knowing how to manage on Instagram and versus Facebook versus TikTok and like that was a competitive advantage where they would pay us. That was the value gap was like, hey, we'll help you win on these platforms. We'll help you with ads. You don't understand how to do it. We'll help you build and host your websites. You don't understand that. Like it was based off the premise, and this was years and years and years ago at this point, is based off the premise that like we have that information, but you don't, and you don't have time to figure that out. So there's a real value exchange. But like when our value was writing your newsletter once a month, and now like someone turns to an AI for that and it does as good or a better job, then it challenges the person who was doing that before. I would say first and foremost on the quality, like there are copywriters who will never get beaten by AI. They are sleeping so soundly because they are dedicated to the craft. They understand human. They can communicate. They can like draw out the human experience. And there are so many copywriters that are not sleeping well because
Mm-hmm.
they're just not sure what's going to happen, right? That's across like yeah, you look at like all the different like professional service spaces with knowledge work, and there's this like it feels existential. Like, so what's my job if not write report, like give the client the strategy document, right? But it's to connect with people and try to understand them more because right now that's not what AI knows.
Yeah.
And that's where we kind of shifted our focus is like we'll leverage AI to do the admin slog of like writing and drafting the 40-page deliverable files. We'll inject those files with much better content because we've understood the team better because we're not spending all of our time for that billable project behind the doors, writing and crafting and wordsmithing. Rather, we're spending more time with the client understanding them. And that I think is the difference is like it's our job to understand them more, which is yeah, it makes consulting really hard because traditionally it's been like, well, we have a good way of approaching it, and so we'll just put them through our paces. But when the environment changes so much, when the answers are not constant, the whole thing is a lot more complex.
Yeah. I'd say my other observation of this year is just the broadness of the across the board general change that AI is sort of or disruption, I'll call it, that AI is causing. Like, and I'll just give you some examples of like, here we are trying to figure out this constantly changing AI space, but it's like, I have a marketing agency and like the impact on search is like a huge topic.
Yeah.
Like this is such a big, profound topic and a big, profound change. And it's like every single tool we use is changing. Every single, search. It's been 30 years of search that's completely
Yeah.
becoming dismantled. And now how to do SEO and how to do all the things we do as a marketing agency is completely changing. It's having such a profound impact on so many different things that it's really really hard just to sort of kind of keep up. Honestly, like I was kind of like I'm feeling a little burnt out, honestly, Josh, just because like
Yeah.
everywhere I look it's like I got to think about how this is impacting this and how this is changing and how we need to change and adapt and everywhere
Yeah.
every single thing, right? It's really, really profound and
Yeah.
it's really hard, right? So, I think, I don't know, I was listening to something yesterday. Oh yeah, I was listening to a podcast. So one of my favorite podcasts is called Hard Fork, and it's a couple guys from one guy from the New York Times and another guy, and they went to some conference in, the Silicon Valley, and they were talking about it, and it's like a conference of these like, people at the forefront of AI, and they said it was an interesting conference because there were doomers there and there were accelerationists there and there was like people from both sides of the sort of AI spectrum in terms of kind of how fast things are changing and what the impacts are going to be, and they were talking about it, and they're like, what was interesting about it was you had these people who were, you know debate wasn't, is this going to change this or that? It was like, they were like, the timeline was like, we could hit this artificial general intelligence in 2026 or maybe 10 years later. Like that's the
Hmm.
timeline they're talking about. Like that's the, you know what I mean? And it's like, that's
Yeah.
so much change in so little time, and already the change has been so extreme that, and like the vast majority of people in the world aren't even like, this is their point and I agree with them. It's like here are these people they were talking about, and I forget this concept. It was like this scientific concept about like, you know, how long there was a debate apparently at this conference with how long is it going to take for the scientific concept, which is like basically surrounding the sun with these like machines that can like draw the sun's energy so that we'd have infinite energy sources on Earth or whatever. And they're talking about like how long is it, they're debating about how long is it going to be before we achieve that. And they're talking about in the next 15, 20 years kind of thing, right? It's
Yeah.
like that is so insane. Right. And then they're like, and here meanwhile, the 95% of the population or 98% of the population are just kind of going about their lives like, like nothing's happening. Right. It's like it's so crazy to think about just how big this whole thing is.
It is. I think you're talking to one of the things that we learned as well. That's like the more you know, the more complicated and like energy draining it gets. Like, because you're talking like there's not an end, like feasibly an end to the creativity and imagination that's driving like progress and innovation in the space. Like, especially specifically with AI, is like the someone mentioned it like a year or so ago that was like there's a really popular quote about like the total addressable market for this like the opportunity, the AI opportunity is every piece of software that's ever been created so far, but like at like an insane multiplier if that's really unknown. Like
Yeah.
so not just like every line of code that's ever been written, but like every line of code that's ever been written times infinity, which is like not like it's not like that's real. Like
Yeah.
because we can come up with new things and new patterns and new pieces of solutions and tools and tech. The learning though was like how because like we've been sitting with this for like a year now, like thinking about this exact problem of like, man, it is overwhelming. Like I was laying on the floor yesterday after we did our session, had we did a big debrief, and we're like, how do we help bridge the gap? Like that was what we were talking about. It was so energy intensive. I'm like laying on the floor, just like starfishing is what I call it, where I'm just like I'm fried, my brain doesn't know what to do or think, so I'm just gonna like let it like just like reset.
Yeah.
That's like very normal. Like I've done a lot of starfishing in the last couple of years. But like as we've thought about how overwhelming it is for like the more you know and having spent a few thousand hours in these tools, the new way we're thinking about it is like, how do we protect people from that exact experience? Because
Mm,
what we really want them to do is figure out how to like write the report a bit faster and how to like delegate doing certain things to different tools that exist that can be helpful now. And so
yeah,
instead of like creating more, it's interesting because it's like instead of creating more like a deeper knowledge in terms of vocabulary and like trying to get people on this path, like a continuous improvement path of like you got to constantly be learning and seeing what everybody else is doing and keeping up with the news and knowing who's like in and out and who's, on top. Like that's like an exhausting process to keep up with. And just like
yeah,
even like if you just follow the news piece of that, it's like overwhelmingly like I have 25 newsletters in my email every day. And they all
hmm
have 10 to 20 things that they're trying to create value by sharing with me. And they're all like important. Like these
yeah,
are not shitty newsletters, really good. And
yeah,
like you just committed to that and trying to like relay that to someone else who's like not opened up, like they don't know how to log into their account on ChatGPT yet.
right,
Because like we deal with people like that every day. We work with folks that are like we're helping like, hey, here's the URL, here's the login button, and then here's oh, where do you keep your password? And they're like, we heard this week, my daughter has it. So they texted their daughter, and daughter's like 15 minutes later, like, here it is. And he's like, all right, great, I can log in. But like, if we just think about like the AI piece of like the tech, the exciting, like magical pieces of it, we skip the like, where are people at? Like,
yeah,
is that guy wrong for using that way of logging in? Like, no, I can't say that definitively yes or no. I like, because like, he's probably seen multiple times. Like he probably had his like private information hacked by some group in the past, however many times in the past decade, and has every right to not trust. I'm gonna save it in my browser, or I'm gonna save it somewhere digitally. Like
yeah,
that's the more complicated part of this that we're like instead of focusing on all the noise, we're focusing on like what's the clear path then to help. It's like
yeah,
we got to think about all those things.
yeah,
So
yeah, yeah,
that's now where
yeah,
we're starting to focus is like, let's just protect from all the AI noise because it's a bubble, definitely is an echo chamber. Because what we really want people to do is like learn to have a trusting relationship with a tool like ChatGPT so that they go there every day and work with it. That's what
yeah.
we
And it's a really hard thing as a consultant because I feel like, you mentioned, the sort of the people that are filling up your inbox with newsletters every day and because they're trying to add value and there's just all this noise on the floor. And it's like it's really hard, I think, for us as consultants in terms of like, yeah, it's really easy to do that and to be those people, but like, is that really truly adding value to the users we're trying to help? And I think you and I agree the answer is no, but then how do you kind of like
hmm
also sort of position yourself as sort of somebody that is at the forefront of this and can help and all these kinds of things, right? So it's like it's a tier
Yeah.
point. It's just a really hard balance. And I'm just gonna sort of riff on what you just said in terms of just
Yeah.
like the noise out there. So yesterday I started listening to this podcast and it was like with a neuroscientist, and they started getting into like the difference between intelligence and consciousness and like can artificial beings achieve consciousness, and like I like started listening and I was like, I have to turn this off. This is like it's too much. This is just making me crazy. Like this is way too far out there, right? And so I like just stopped. I was like, I'm just gonna listen to something simpler because it's like, yeah, it's like that's like that's like the level at which some people are thinking about this kind of stuff, and it's crazy. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so yeah, it's just a big space with a
Yeah.
lot of different components to it, right? And
Mhm.
all that noise out there, really, to your point, has nothing to do with your average kind of person who works in an office just trying to run a tourism organization or just trying to help people have a great tourism experience or whatever. It's
Yeah.
like there's like such a huge gap between those two concepts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've got a question for you because you've like I feel like done a really, really good job of helping business leaders in tourism organizations understand how to gear up and get ready. And like I specifically thinking about like what we thought this year was that people would be investing in all these technical solutions and that those technical solutions people were going to be ready to take them into production and like, hey, well, all these customer facing like solutions that'll be great. The technology's been there and it's been ready for a while and certainly have capabilities to deliver on those ideas, but found like companies actually have not actually they've never set aside money for this yet. They haven't budgeted for AI.
Mhm.
And like whether it's training or technical solutions or the opportunity at hand in general, I feel like you've done a good job of working with and partnering with leaders to like sit in their budget meetings as they're doing their like year-end planning or their year ahead planning and stuff. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, what I'll say is, to your point, like I don't want to say zero sort of companies, but like, and let's first differentiate and make a distinction between enterprise level companies, because that's
Mhm.
a whole different beast. And we,
Yeah.
you and I, Josh, I think we've talked about, we have like almost like zero interest in working with enterprise level companies. There's a lot of consultants, very expensive consultants in that space. There's very few people helping small and medium sized businesses, which is where our interest is. So my entire premise here is on the small and medium sized businesses. So I'll say practically zero small, medium sized businesses came into 2024 with any budget for anything related to AI. And
Yeah.
so, it's just been a curiosity like it's just started to become a curiosity throughout 2024 for those businesses and for associations. And so, associations and conference organizers are the ones I think that are sort of, hearing from people who are curious about this, who are bringing people like me in to start talking about this. And, what has worked in terms of those conversations and the budget conversation is I think the way we just break it down in terms of, the AI adoption framework, and we talk about it's a people and culture issue and a structures and processes issue. And so to your point about like if I came in and started wowing everybody with all these amazing things these things can do and all this, voodoo magic in their eyes kind of thing, it's like they would glaze over and I would lose them, right? And so what's really worked for me is just, again, when I speak at conferences, it's like how many people are using Gen AI at work with using free tools, and 85% of the people put their hands up. Second question is how many companies have responsible AI use policies and principles, and like 100% of the hands go down or 99% of the hands go down. And like that is such an aha moment for so many business leaders. And it's like, and then I start talking about, shadow AI use and some of the ways that, employees are doing it anyways and hiding it. And like I just kind of talk about the problems, right? And like
Yeah.
from a leadership and from a like a safety or a security perspective, kind of like what are the implications of not stepping up, and sort of, so that's how I approached it. And I think that's what's resonated for a lot of leaders and employers. And it's like we need to do the hard work. And
Mhm.
I've had a whole bunch of people being like, oh, can you just give me some responsibility policies and principles? And it's like I can, but like they need to be contextualized for you and your business. They need to, right? That's why we have an employer survey and an employee survey and workshops. And we like, yes, you can just make up things.
Yeah.
Yes, you can put it on your website, but it's like if you haven't actually spent the time thinking about it, contextualizing it, understanding its meaning in your business, understanding its meaning for your individual employees, having their input, having their involvement, getting their buy-in. It's like there's a process to this whole thing, right? And what's interesting, I'll say, is with one of our clients, which is an interesting client. I've been going through this process. I went like a week ago. I was going through this process of our phase two, which is the, AI vision, mission, core values, responsible AI policies and principles, and how to create a AI council for your organization. And what these people said was, it was really fascinating because they were like, wow, this process that you're putting us through actually is so helpful for us for so many other places and areas. Like we've never thought about our business in this way, and really thought about how we need to organize ourselves, and really thought about, and it was like IT and HR and like all of
Yeah.
these, sort of non-core functions. I'll call it, they are core functions, but you know what I mean? Not like the main thing they do as a business type functions. And they were like, yeah, this whole process and this whole framework is like really makes us need to think about our entire business kind of from top to bottom. And so again, that was very encouraging and positive for me. But employers are just starting to now. And so typically this last quarter of 2024 becomes the budgeting and planning quarter. And I had many phone calls with many people being like, okay, we want to do this in 2025. Like, what does it take? What's the cost? Whatever. And so my observation of 2024 is this year has been a year of organizations starting to prepare for this conversation. And
Mhm.
now they're sort of thinking 2025, let's start going down this path. But you know things move slowly. It's not a, I used to, and I share this story with my staff all the time. I used to be like, I'm like a constantly thinking, constantly trying to what's next, where we go kind of thing. That's just who I am. And so it's like I used to when I started my business, like do all this planning in January or in December, and it's like January 1, we're gonna launch all this stuff and hit the ground running. And it's like then I realized it's like most of the world doesn't really kind of get going until February. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like my urgency on everything that's just in my the just I just live with a sense of urgency is not the way the most of the world operates, right? And so it's like
Mhm.
even when people are talking to me about, yeah, we want to get this going in 2025, it's like sometime in 2025, right? It's
Yeah.
not where I'm like, man, there's so much urgency, we got to get going, whatever. So it's like, you know, the cycle is the cycle, the business cycle is the cycle, and honestly that's going to be probably the biggest, I don't want to say slowdown of AI adoption, but the biggest reality of AI adoption, across the board is just like businesses are going to move at the pace businesses move. They're going to adopt things in the way that works in their culture and organization. You and I talk about, you need to create this culture of innovation. And it's like, it's like if you've been running a business for 30 years and you don't have a culture of innovation, you're not going to just suddenly it's 2025. Now you have a culture of innovation, right? It's like
Yeah.
that ain't happening, right? So we really got to think in baby steps, and we really
Yeah.
got to kind of be realistic. And, it's just sort of, I always talk about the coalition of the willing. It's like, hey, whoever's ready and willing, let's go. And, you know, they'll take the lead and they'll tell their friends, and we'll get there, right? But it's
Right.
it's a slow process, right? It's just a
Yeah.
slow, arduous process. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so hard, I think, too, for folks to think about, especially like leaders who have not led AI adoption before, which is like everyone, except for like those who have been in the space for decades, who are the like true like, trendsetters here. Like you don't if you don't have something physical, like a tool, when we think of like if I used to work in landscaping, a new tool, like a new trimmer that's like the New Year's model or a new mower brand or something of that like would come along. And the boss would, invest in some equipment and be like, here you go, guys. Here's how the new mower works. Buttons are the same, controls are the
Right.
same. This lever's over here, not over there. And it
Yeah.
goes faster, be more careful, right? Like I think it's easy to lose sight of how relatable that experience is like, is getting a new tool transformational? Well, it depends on the tool.
Right.
If it's
And how you
like
use it, right?
going from a push mower to a ride on like a tractor and then going from a tractor to a zero turn, those are major jumps. You're going to get way more done, way faster and better. Like like faster and better was is like those marked jumps. AI similar where you can get more done better, and people often forget
Yeah.
the better part. Like I could just write my emails faster. I could just get my blog drafted and done right now. Like better is there. But again, if you don't like go through the process of understanding the tools, understanding why it's important, understanding like, okay, because we have more capability, here's what we can do in addition to the things we've already done. Not just in
Hmm.
terms of like loading people up with more work, but like organizationally, we were never able to spend this much time caring for our customers with FaceTime. Now we can. Like if the qualitative pieces of your like customer service of your operations don't improve because of the tool use, like it's a complete miss. And that's why we like to train adoption and intuition more than like from the people side, more than just I used to run my company as like a integration no code slash automation agency, and it's like our goal was to do as much of the work as possible for a team, which meant like cutting people out of processes. And like our goal wasn't ever to like make people lose their jobs, but like when you start to connect the dots in business tools, it's like a lot more can get done faster. And it's like that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not necessarily it's a good thing for like business. Like, but then where do those people's time shift was where we always spent like a good bit of time talking and thinking and training for is like maybe instead of your sales guys loading their information and data into HubSpot, they're able to dial a few more and they're
Right.
able to check in with existing customers in a better way and more consistent, like show up and be more present. Like those shifts are the things that AI challenges. It's like challenges how do we deliver who we are in a more essential way. And
Yeah.
that's very like nebulous.
It is nebulous. Yeah. Yeah. And what I'll say, kind of, you kind of triggered another sort of learning for me for 2024, and this was literally just this week learning. is automation is actually really hard. And, I'm going to kind of tell a story about, internally. So again, we sort of went on a path and basically at the beginning of this year on, okay, we picked ChatGPT, we're going to create custom GPTs, we're going to create a whole library, we're going to create a whole process, we're going to, right? And that's great. And it was awesome and it helped. But, then the reality is that, like, yes, you create all these tools because really custom GPTs are just like tools
Mini
that help
tasks.
sort of
Yeah.
automate a process a little bit to some extent, right? But then it's like also you need to then create process on how to upkeep and manage those things. So I'm going to give you an example. Is we had a client that went through a brand change and changed their like messaging and changed their whatever, but our GPT didn't change. And so like for a long time, not a long time, for a while, our staff was producing outputs with the old language. And Christina was like, this isn't their thing anymore. Like we need to change this. And so it's like the point of what I'm saying is that, like, okay, great, you can create these tools to help make some processes better and more efficient, more effective. But then you also need to create processes of like, how do we make sure that these things are actually remain up to date? And how do we
Yep.
like, and so now what we're doing is we're kind of moving over to our Copilot Pro. So that's a wholesale change that we're doing.
Yeah.
But then it's like, how do we create a system and who's in charge of making sure we're staying up to date on what's changing with our clients. And so, okay, we have so here, and this is a good example, a practical example. It's like, okay, we have these tools that can help automate our work and make it more efficient, produce better outcomes, more on point, and all that kind of stuff. So now our project managers, their job then becomes more they have more time for our clients now, and their time with our clients needs to be about like, okay, what's changing your business, how do we, and then how do you translate that to changing the automation tool to make
Yeah.
sure it reflects those changes? Like, it's
Hmm.
actually really hard. There's a
Yes.
lot of moving parts here, and there's a lot to sort of like structure and systematize and sort of,
Yep.
so and so we're just now going through this journey of like, okay, how often are we going back to these things? What do we need to be asking our clients every month or whatever in
Yep.
terms of making sure they're up to date, right? Because
Hmm.
like you can automate things and forget about them, and then they just are really efficient at going in the wrong direction, right?
It'll keep doing what you like. It's like a state. This is where I think it kind of tees up like the promise of AGI or agents is that like us having to micromanage these things will go away. Like over
Mm-hmm.
like you'll be able to like just let it know. Here we've updated and become a little bit more nuanced in our communication style. Here's things we don't say. We found a few more of those. Can you remember that? And it'll be like, got it. And
Yeah.
then like the next time it does the thing, it's going to be like, hey, here it is. And by the way, I remembered all the things. Here's what we didn't say. Here's how we, implemented that or utilize that context. Like that's right now what we don't have with AI, and we're hoping in the next few years to get to. But in
Yeah.
the current place, it is difficult, which is why it's like when we talk about training clients for AI adoption, they don't get the bells and whistles. Like we don't try to help them understand how to build the best GPTs, how to like by and large, this is like, kind of a broad stroke for like our AI champions, 100% will spend time with them to give their skill sets and help them understand the nuance of like, yeah, like every custom assistant's going to have a knowledge base. It's going to have access to tools. It's going to be able to do certain things. It's going to behave a certain way. It's going to talk to you in a specific manner. And it's going to understand who you are and what your role and goal is in talking to it. But like the moment you tweak any of those things, there's like 10 different things you could adjust. Like, and so it really is tinkering. Like when we say it's tinkering, it's like I went through this process because I'm building a new brand and preparing for launch. It's like I've created the editorial brand guidelines 7 times now,
Mm-hmm.
7 versions in the last 2 weeks because we're spinning through like getting a little bit more clarity on our ICP, getting a little bit more clarity on our messaging, getting a little bit more clarity on how we want to word this thing. And it's like it's more dynamic than like when I used to be a brand strategist and run these projects. It was like a fixed one-way door. Like when we finish and deliver our brand strategy to the client and their new updated words, like that was going to be it till they invested in the project again in like 5 years. And so it was
Right.
like it wasn't this like living and breathing thing as much as it was like we're going to set hard and fast rules so that everybody can stick to those rules for the foreseeable future, and we have to get it right the first time or within the 2 revisions, right? Like that was the like it was just like a much more fixed and constrained process, and now it's very iterative because if I'm going to update that, I just need to change out the information within the files swap the files, save it, and now I have a tool that's ready to not forget the branding. Hey, don't use the restricted logo, use the trademark because we don't have the restricted yet. Like that was like a monthly or a weekly thing when I was project managing my social media people. And it was like, guys, like, do you have the right files downloaded? Like, we were like having these conversations every now and then. Do you even, can you show me what files you are looking at when you're making these graphics? Because it's consistently like something little is weird. And like those were normal conversations versus like if AI does that, you're having the same conversation.
Right.
And then you have to like challenge yourself and be like, wait, no, wait, I uploaded three different logo variations, two of which are not valid anymore. I should just
Right.
remove those from the equation and now they're not being put in.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's like there's a lot
Yeah.
of work
It's
there,
still
right? And
user error.
there's a lot of things to think about and stay on top of and create process around, which so like it's just very overwhelming, honestly. Like I think that's kind of the overall conclusion of this sort of
Yeah.
whole conversation is like it's just things are very messy right now and very overwhelming. And
Yeah.
I want to talk about another observation I've made,
Yes.
which is kind of a really interesting one for me, is that I think that the people at the forefront and the frontiers of this technology have really done a disservice to themselves in terms of, obviously from a PR perspective, kind of talking about all the amazing things AIs can do and sort of selling this message about how amazing these tools, and it's created this impression with people that the tools can do more than they can do, or that it's just really easy to do stuff. And so I'll give you an example, and I'm guilty of this as well, and I'm sort of learned a lesson just this week actually. And so I speak at conferences and I show people Lumen 5. And Lumen
Yeah.
5 is like a quick video generation tool, right? And it's a really great tool and it's an amazing time saver. It can do amazing things, but it's not magic. It still takes work. It's still, so I had a guy that came up to me, approached me a couple of weeks ago and was like, hey, I have a bunch of B-roll and I just want to make a quick little video. And, this Lumen 5 thing that you showed me is pretty amazing. I don't understand how to use it. Like, can you guys just help? I think it's really quick, right? Really quick. And I was like, okay, yeah, sure. We'll help you, whatever. I thought maybe it'd be like 30-second, 15-second video. And then when we started talking to him, he's looking for a 3.5 minute sort of brand video, essentially brand launch video. And it's like, yeah, that's like a 15-hour project, maybe 20 hours, like
Yeah, that's like
using
a
this tool.
$20,000 video.
Right, right,
What the
right.
hell?
But he just sort of thought, oh, like this tool will magically just make this thing for me and it'll be amazing, right? And it's like, and it's like, so it's like there's this impression that people have about what these tools can do. And to your point of like, I think there's a hope that they will be able to do these things, and they definitely can do amazing things and could
Yep.
definitely speed some things up, but they have extreme limitations still. And so there is this gap between, I think, people's expectations or thoughts about what, and similarly, you and I have been kind of sort of pitching this grant writing application tool, right? And it's like, and then I tell people, well, it's $2,500 to get it sort of customized to your business, and it's like, oh, like I think there's like this impression that it's like it's just free or there's no
Yeah.
cost to it, or like it's just gonna do it because I want, like I think and I want, and it's just gonna do it, and it's like
Right.
it's not that easy.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and they see like if like that's a maybe a exposure of a truth we've learned that prototyping things is very, very cheap and
Mhm.
productizing things or pushing things to production is not cheap at all. Like
Yeah.
my custom GPT that I make based off of my impression of what you think without all the context and details about the thing that you want it to do, I can spin that up in a minute. And
Right.
we could be like talking to it and be like, see, this is good. And like the fallacy there is that like in a custom GPT world, like I wouldn't just start using that if I like for stuff in my business like that simple. It's easy to show the concept of an idea, right? Like it's the concept
Right.
of but like people don't understand because it's a tech process to go from like concept to production.
Yeah.
And I would say the same thing about your example with the video. Like the video tools we have with AI are doing 99% of the work right now because it's easier for it to manage 99% of that work. The moment someone says, "Well, I have this thing I want to do," and they wanted to basically like if they were going to partner with a vendor, with a video team, a production crew, they would have a creative director who would help storyboard the
Right.
narrative. They'd have like a
Right.
brand manager who was like making sure everything was nailing the essence there, the brand core and all that stuff. And they'd have a copywriter like picking the perfect words, and they'd have like 100 more pieces of this puzzle to put together. And with
Yeah.
the current capabilities of these AI tools, it's like it's going to have 99 of those pieces put together in a very fixed way because that's how it has to do it for it to work. But
Hmm.
you said like what's this disservice here is like that's easier as a tech team and as a product team, it's easier to do a deterministic path forward and allow the one variable instead of the reality is when you hire a professional team to do something like that, there's 100 variables and you work through each one together. AI is not that
Right.
yet. Like the granularity in many cases, like especially in video and image, that's a great use case is like if you have a logo that was generated by AI and you wanted to tweak one little thing, you're at the mercy of the model that you're talking, the tool that you're talking to, as to if it even has that feature of editing this part of the image. And
Yeah.
then, but if you were working with the designer, you'd be like, can you round the corner to like 30 degrees, not 25?
Right.
And they'd be
Yeah.
like, yeah, 2 seconds, boom, saves.
Right. Yeah.
So in that
Like
case,
getting your AI to do that, like good luck, right?
no, because it's not the same technology. It's a different
Yeah.
type of technology altogether, but it looks like, and this is
Yeah.
this is like where maybe the like there's a deep dark hole to fall into, a black hole of like no one knows in the black box of AI. Like it's so complex to explain why this graphic that came out of this tool that's just a picture is not a vectorized editable graphic that
Right.
a designer would have to like do a lot of like processing work to get to convert that to be like a workable asset, right? Like, and that's really nuanced and in the weeds. So it's like these are the types of things that it's like we have to learn, and it's like an ongoing process. No one has the answers yet. We have to learn how to make the full experience right, correct. From someone who sees like this chat bot in ChatGPT can talk to all my sales data and help me analyze stuff. To know that's 1% of the project and the next 99% of the project because they're like this is very common like oh we need one tool that analyzes everything we're like well just use the tools that already exist and they're like but like it doesn't do everything we want so like great you're 1% of the way there so
Hmm.
the other 99% is going to be like each percent has like 25 different variables and we're an infinite number of possibilities to choose from and what's going to take that's what takes the time once we define all these things best case scenarios we create a deterministic pattern for how to get there and then you have this like fixed tool that like in 6 months might be outdated
Right.
like that's the nature of software right now is like custom software especially is like we're building solutions that we have to just caveat this is going to require us to stay around and it's not because we want to be slimy about the sales and like just take your money but like in 6 months you're going to be like hey we talked about all these other features that we were waiting for AI to improve on now it seems like they're here
Yeah.
what can we do about it? And we're like, great. That means we're 1% of the way started on these things.
Right. Yeah.
So you start this infinite loop and like fast forward like to the capabilities of these tools being far, far, far better. And like every company will have their own software. They're like, we won't need HubSpot. We won't need Gmail.
Right.
We won't need Google Docs. Like everybody will just have their own version of all that for their brand. Like the
Yeah.
Tourism AI Network Everything app. That's your operating system for your computers. It gets all your stuff done with the team. It helps augment every piece of the work that's like it's best at versus what the team is best at, right? Like that's
Right.
the future and the promise. But like
But there's
until
a
then,
long path to get to that future and that promise. And I think
yeah,
that like my point is that I feel like we've been sold bag of goods about what the technology is today because we're showing amazing capability. You know, Sora is a great example. I mean,
yeah,
Sora was sort of like shown to the world almost a year ago, and now it's finally available, though I still can't access it because it's like
I was gonna say the launch
oversubscribed,
is a
right?
lie.
So it's like the promise just isn't quite the deliverable, right? And so then and
Yeah,
I so I think to your point is like I keep coming back like even things like what to build and what to productize and what solutions available. Like you and I have I feel like spun our wheels a little bit on this here and there because it's like probably the reality is just like really focus for the next I don't even know how long on just like training and just teaching and just like sort of like coaching. And really that's probably 90% of what people need. And it's just again, you know, I mean, I use the example of your logo example. It's like because I have in my core in my intro to AI, you know, a whole example I use about, oh, I can use this to create this example of this logo, and here's a mock-up of a website. And but the whole point of me showing people that isn't, hey, you can build a website mock-up and design and you can build a logo. It's like, no, you can build, maybe where the value is you can use the tool to come up with like an example first version that you can show a designer more easily about, hey, I like this and I don't like that. And there's a lot of value in that. There's a ton of value in that.
Yes.
Instead of trying to like use words to communicate how
Right,
you
or
want the logo
guess.
to look, like you actually have like a working prototype, but that's all
Hmm.
you have is a working prototype, and it's not
Yes.
really actually a logo, and it's actually now it needs to be designed as a logo. And right, and so it's like, again, that's an extremely useful use case. And same thing with a, like I can use ChatGPT to create a website mockup, and I can then use that website mockup as like, I like this, I like that, I don't like that, but somebody still has to create an actual website mockup.
Yeah.
And so, like, to your point, it's like it's 1% of the whole like value chain, but it's a valuable percent.
Right. The piece
Right.
that's hilarious, yeah, especially with like getting things to production. I have like my own example from the past like couple weeks. I tested using there's like 3 or 4 new AI development tools that can make apps, make websites, make page, set it up with the promise of like build an app in minutes with words, not code, and it's alive. And like I spent 15 hours so far launching one web page that works. It's live, it's on the internet. But the problem is the tools that I've used so far can't create updates to that live site now
Yeah,
because they haven't made it that far yet in their program.
right.
Their product is too new. So I was like, I got the prototype, the website's alive, but I'm like, oh, I want to add a blog section. I'm like arguing with an AI agent about it, and it's like I had to switch tools because it was like I couldn't update it in this one tool, so I went to another tool and I asked it, but then it didn't remember any of the like pre-prompting that other tool had done to like make this actually work, right? Once again, back to the like deterministic way
And,
linking
and you
things.
have a good sense of like some of the tools that are out there, like never mind
These are the
somebody that
best
does it
tools that
from scratch.
everybody's like gassing up right now. These are the best of
Yeah.
the best. And we realize it's a new workflow where I have to go with like a cutting edge tool to get the thing alive for the first time to prototype it. Then I can like, but I could host it on a website and I got it to the internet. And then I'm like, I would naturally, like if I had gone through this with my product team, like I did this separately from like their work as a test. If I had gone through them, they would have done like their Figma design. They would have like done a couple rounds of revision with me. We would have talked through some ideas. We would have designed all the screens and then handed it off to our like, dev to then build it in our like Webflow instance. And then I would have like, in about a month cycle, like we would have this website pushed to like to production. And then if I wanted
Yeah.
to make updates, I'd be like inside of Webflow CMS, like adding blogs. And here I am last night. I was like, I couldn't sleep, so I'm up at like 2 a.m. Like, just add the page. I just want and remember that we're using the font. We already said one font and only one font. It's already there in the project. Just use it. And it's like this other tool is like, I've never heard of that. Like that's kind of how it's behaving. He was like, I don't know any of this stuff. Like I'm just looking at the files and the context, and it's like somebody built this, and you asked me to do this other thing. There's like a bridge gap between. So it's like as an example, is like my prototype took 10 hours just trying to get it to do one more thing. Like I wanted to edit and revise that one more time without having to relaunch or republish my file in a new project. It took half that time to not even get there. I'm like, I'm gonna have to scrap all the updates and have to
Yeah.
come with it fresh and probably just like go back to the team and be like, all right, team, I have a really nice one page and I would love to have the rest of the site. Like, and
That's
I
it.
wouldn't say I'm bad at this. Like, I don't know
Right.
coding and programming, but I'm not bad at this thing. But it's like, this is an example that's like, I've spent 4,000 hours using AI tools like this. And this is a problem that I'm experiencing now. And so
Yeah.
it's like when we talk to people who have spent 0 hours using these tools, that's the thing we have to keep bathing in is like someone is at 0. We want to help them get through like hour 10 together. And by the
Right.
time we see someone pass that 10-hour mark on their own journey, that means like they're starting to do something for themselves. And this is a muscle, so they have to. They can't
Hmm.
look at what I've done in my body of work and say, great, I love that you've made all this progress and you know all these different things that you've tested for yourself. I'll take that. Like, I'll take the 4,000
Yeah.
hours, please. Like, and
Yeah.
no, that's 2.5 years of head start. And now like right, like having to like think back to that. What was it like in the early days? What was I thinking about? What are my baseline assumptions? Like these are the things that we keep, back to like the learnings. Like this is what we've learned.
Yeah.
This is far more complex. The technology is perfectly advanced enough to help, I would say, by and large, 90+% of professionals, especially knowledge workers,
Hmm.
as is. If we got no more updates, we could completely transform how people work across all sectors, not just tourism. Therefore, it's our job as leaders to help guide people through their first steps so that they can build confidence, build momentum, and do it in a calculated way. That's the whole, like, that's what we've learned is like the most helpful thing we can do is help someone think about the way that they work in terms of processes and systems, which isn't a new concept. Write those ways down and then start to like, okay, I found a way to use a prompt here and that saved me 5 minutes. Great. I've documented 5 minutes of time savings.
Yeah.
And every time I do this project, I'm going to come back to this little documented process, and then I'm going to like figure out if I can get a little bit faster.
Yeah.
And that we've started doing that internally in the last quarter of this year. Of like our process to deliver a project for a client took 20 hours to get the last file made. Then it took 10 hours once we figured out like what are the prompts we want to keep using. Then we
Right.
refined it, and now it takes 5 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that
But again,
process,
you're a company and you're an organization and you're a person who's like obsessed with this and
yeah,
spending all your time thinking about how to make it more efficient, more effective. But if you're like just some person who's at 0 to 10, to your
yeah,
point, it's like, and I think we need to not overestimate or the value of, like, so, it's like, oh, you're just using it to make your email, like write your emails better or change the tone. And it's like,
right.
oh, it's like, that's nothing. And it's like, actually, that's a lot for people. And
That
that's
is a
awesome.
lot.
And like, good for them. It's like, we should not undervalue just those little wins, right? Like it's literally
Hmm.
just, hey, I use this tool or, whatever the extremely simple basic use case is, like we should not undervalue that for people and the impact that that has on people because
Yeah.
those are the wins that are going to get them further and further. And quite frankly, it's like we're probably, to your point, talking 3 to 5 years before many organizations are in a place where your head is at in terms of how do we improve our processes and how do we sort of like go from turning a document that took 10 hours because we've used these prompts and we've whatever to 5 hours to 3 hours. It's like that's a big concept for people, right? And
Yeah.
so we can't underestimate just the little wins that people are getting, and
Yeah.
we probably need to celebrate those more, I guess.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I still have this like chronic tech bro like vein that keeps like we've tried to shift vocabulary, and I've tried to like in the past couple months especially as I've done a lot more training sessions with people who are non-techie, and like a lot because a lot of like the year I was talking with tech people and people who are in the space in the bubble already and like part of the circle, and like as I expanded that circle myself, I realized my vocabulary's wrong. That's a big learning. Like when I talk tech bro, I could watch a full room of 30 people glaze over and like completely miss what I'm saying. And that is like a humbling experience. You're like, I think I'm clearly articulating myself, but I'm doing it in a way that's a different language. So like
Yeah.
it's not helpful in that setting. So like that's been something for me. I like simple things like catching when I say obviously. Like that's a
Right.
nuance. Like I caught myself yesterday
Yeah.
saying it to somebody, is like, obviously you can just copy this and like move it to another place.
Not that
And
obvious.
it was like the obvious thing I was saying was like there's a button over here, but I just told you there's a button down here. And it was
Right.
obviously you just copy this button. It's a copy
Yeah.
symbol. I know that. I'm Gen Z.
Yeah,
But it's
exactly.
like,
Yeah.
what's the copy symbol? It's like, oh, this one, you know?
Right.
And that's the level of like you just I think in terms of like on a personal level, like the better I get at translating from tech to non-tech. And like, because that's been what we've described that as my role. Like, I've been talking to product teams all year and business leaders, but even like business leaders have a level of like business jargon that they're like, they can, duel it out. Like, I mean, with our jargon, like that's very common in consulting. You have like a very like highfalutin language. But then when we're like in the weeds with people, helping them understand stuff for the first time, like they're super not like
Yeah. Yeah.
self-serving. So that's the big thing
And
going into the next year that I'm like thinking and focusing about is like it's not dumbing it down. It's
no,
learning to communicate more effectively.
it's speaking their language, right?
Yeah.
And so that's, I think that's what one of my lessons learned from this year also is just like, and this is just what's worked for me is that I'm actually not a techie person. I'm
Mm.
actually, we were talking before we hit record here is that like I'm a Gen Xer, but on the
Hmm.
cusp. And so I didn't grow up with computers. I grew up with like literally typing classes with typewriters early and then very quickly,
Hmm.
like, I was at the very my second typing class was on a computer, but it was like, we had like Apple IIes and we had like computers that did nothing like of
Yeah.
value, right? And so it's like I basically grew up without computers. It wasn't until my 30s that really computers became more important and understanding them become more important. And now in my 40s, it's like, yeah, now I'm becoming more tech
Hmm.
savvy. And I hire people all the time that are 1,000 times more tech savvy than me because they're younger than me and they grew up with this stuff. And it's like, and so I think that's what's actually been a kind of a success for me is that I just go to these conferences and I just speak about like, hey, I'm just a guy running a business that's like seeing what's going on and I'm like quite concerned about what it means for my business and how do I adapt and adopt and like just trying to figure out change and change management. So like I barely talk about technology, honestly. Like I talk about
Yeah.
obviously in the context of this technology, but not, you know, chat GDP is this and Gemini is that. It's like none of that has any value to anybody. It's like, right. So I'm like basically, like, and I think that's where we landed on this AI adoption framework of people and process and culture and HR and all these kinds of things. It's like that's what we're spending most of our time on because like the technology is just a tool. This is we're in a change management process because the world is changing. Like that's
Yeah.
fundamentally what's happening, right? And so I think that's what's
Exactly.
resonated, but we need to stay true to that core and
Hmm.
not be tempted, I think, to the earlier conversation of like, yeah, I can write social media content all day long about this tech and this tool and that tool and this and there's 1,000 people out there doing that constantly, and I can do that to grow my Instagram because
Yeah.
that's the easy way to grow my Instagram, to be a tech bro. But it's like that doesn't serve my audience at all. It has no value to the people I'm trying to help, right? And
Right.
so we really need to, I think, going into 2025, be really true to our core of who we serve and what we're trying to serve and really be thoughtful about that, right? And I'm just going to share this story because I just finished watching on Netflix. There's a great documentary right now about Vince McMahon from WWE.
Oh, nice.
And it's honestly like probably the best series I've ever watched and about like just about a business person. And like, you know, I'm not a WWE fan, whatever, but just the story of Vince McMahon in terms of like always understanding his audience and what his audience wants
Hmm.
and not having an ego about that. And so like, he would have like fights with like, he'd get into big fights with like, him and Hulk Hogan didn't talk for a period of time, but he knew that getting Hulk Hogan back was what was going to get his audience excited and what was going to like win his business, you know what I mean? And so like
Yeah.
he always basically put his clients first and his clients needs first,
Hmm.
and that's like I would say the crux of him as a successful business person. And I think that for you and I and what we're trying to do is like just really understanding the needs of our clients and understanding how to put those needs first and not getting our head of ourselves with the tech is kind of our solution or our AI win in terms of like the consulting we're doing, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. It's like, hmm, it's so simple if we keep the focus. I think the
It's so
focus
hard to keep the focus because
focus is the
folks going
hard
on
part.
there. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is awesome. I think there's so many wins, like, and I'd love to hear from people. Like, I'm starting to make rounds of like other colleagues in the space to hear like what are they doing. And I think for clients that we've worked with, it'd be cool to circle back and be like, all right, what have you learned? What do you want to
Yeah.
learn? Because we're currently working like through this like HR approach now. Like the training and adoption is from a people standpoint, and like that I'm really excited about just because it pulls together like actually all the work that I've ever done.
Yeah.
So it's like it feels a lot more cohesive than just tech. But yeah, it's gonna be. I think when we have this conversation in a year, it's gonna be fascinating as
Mhm.
well. Like tune in a year because the
Yeah.
conversation's gonna be, I'm sure, like wildly different, but also the same.
I think so. I
You
think
know?
so. Yeah. Because
I think
humans
it's
are
okay.
humans, right? And human inertia is human inertia. And the way humans adapt is the way, right? Like the humans aren't going to
Yeah.
change
Can you?
despite how
Oh,
fast this technology is changing.
yeah. Here's an idea to wrap. Can you send a message to us in a year? Here. What is your prediction? What do you think is the top learning or the top aha from fast forward 12 months when we're having this conversation again? See how close our predictions are.
I like it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Josh. Great conversation as always. I think, yeah, that definitely do kind of send us that note, send us a message, leave a comment in the podcast. Love to hear from you. Maybe what we'll do is obviously we write a blog for every podcast, so we'll sort of put it out as a challenge to people, and let's just sort of hear what we hear back. But yeah, great conversation. I'm really excited for 2025, but also overwhelmed about sort of the task ahead of us, but in a good way. So looking forward to it, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for joining Peter and Josh on another episode of the Tourism AI podcast, where they dive into the AI tools they're building to help tourism operators and DMOs perform, as well as other relevant updates for the tourism industry. Stay up to date between episodes at tourismainetwork.com or on socials at Tourism AI Network.